And I'm not necessarily going to even achieve as great of success unless I'm bringing in a broader perspective, a range of ideas. And that's where I really feel like, grow so much if we could diversify what is being put into the business. You know what I mean? So it needs to be more than just my vision trickling down to the growing team. So I'm thinking like, I have to ask them what they're contributing, and maybe that informs something new to change even something about Ancestors Unknown.
Welcome to Color at Work, a safe space for sharing and strengthening the Black and Brown experience in the workplace. My name is Sofia Medina Andrade, and I believe in the efficiency of diversity and inclusion to achieve a more dignified and fair working world. Hello, community. In today's episode, I will be speaking with an inspiring guest. Saxon is an African American that has moved from the US to Europe after 10 years of working in the education nonprofit sector. Currently, she lives between several countries to serve our community uniquely. She has created Ancestors Unknown, an education nonprofit that provides schools with genealogy research and history curriculums. You know when we complain about having our history taught in the wrong way at school? Well, Dana has traveled the world to dismantle that narrative and offer to new audiences and schools the untold histories. Hi, Dana, and very welcome.
Hi, Sophia. Thank you for having me. This is so exciting.
I'm so happy to have you here. Can you please tell us a bit more about yourself and your professional journey?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. And it is quite a complicated journey. It definitely wasn't point A, point B type of process of figuring out what my job or my career really was going to be. So I'll do my best to tell a very long story as simply as possible, right? So I'll start with explaining where I am right now. I'm the founder and CEO of a social enterprise that's based in the UK. I'm based now in Bristol in the UK, and I'm running this organization called Ancestors Unknown. And I'm teaching young people and adults as well to appreciate their personal histories, their identities, their stories. Where do we all come from? So I'm bringing family history research and other untold histories. So the stories of Black and Brown people, the marginalized histories that typically get left out of classrooms are typical history curricula that you get in primary and secondary school. I want young people to see their stories represented. So I'm bringing those untold histories and combining it with teaching them about their personal stories, their family histories, their community histories, and giving them a sense of inquiry and inspiration to start asking questions about where they come from and who am I? Because that's about that age when those questions start coming up, right? So what was my journey? How did I get to this point? This is where it gets a little bit complicated. I did start, as you mentioned, over 10 years ago, working in the nonprofit sector and specifically with education organizations. Prior to that, I went through law school and I got a law degree in Philadelphia. And that was where I thought I was going to do nonprofit law type of work, but that wasn't inspirational enough for me. I wanted to have a bit more impact. Practicing law, it wasn't a fit for me, right? So I was trying to figure out shortly after law school, I didn't even take the bar because why take a test to pursue a career, that I just knew I wasn't going to do. So I figured out, long story short, that education work was the right fit. And I started working in nonprofits, doing fundraising work, some program management. And that took me from Philadelphia to Oakland in California, and then back to the East Coast in the US to New York. And in all of these organizations, I was working really to serve Black and Brown communities, like, improving educational opportunities, improving outcomes for our young people. But to be frank with you, Sophia, all of those organizations were run by white men. And all of them were pursuing funding that was managed and controlled by more wealthy white men. And it all felt all of my work felt in service of their missions. Now, there always was a benefit to our communities. As I said, like, we're working to improve outcomes for Black and Brown children, but it just didn't feel totally satisfying for me to not have control over what those outcomes that we were pursuing were. And I didn't really necessarily want to be working on someone else's mission forever, right? During this time of working in New York, and I was realizing that this wasn't necessarily my long term, I got a little bit depressed and I got a little bit like anxious about my next step. And it was during that time that I started looking for my family history. And we can get into this maybe a little bit later, but if you'd like, but the family history questions that started coming up for me were things that had always been present for me. So I just thought, I wonder if I could challenge this idea that I can't learn about my family history, really from a negative place. Like, I'm in such a bad mood. Let me just prove it to be true that my family history is impossible to learn more. But I ended up learning so much about my family history, and it was so inspiring. And at the same time, I was having these questions of what is my life's work going to be and how can I improve, the lives or the outcomes of young people. And I thought, that is where I need to combine my two missions. I want to introduce more people to family history research, and I want this to be, how I'm reaching young people. So that is how Ancestors Unknown was born. And then I ended up, pursuing a long path that's gotten me here today to be doing this work on a pretty, introductory, I'm just getting started scale, but I'm excited to see it grow.
Such an inspiring journey, an important work as well. It's beautiful. You're living in the UK, your company is based in the UK. So I'm curious, why doing this work in Europe?
It wasn't necessarily something that I would have predicted myself. When I was in New York, I was looking for another place to live and I wanted to start over, have a new experience. And for a number of reasons, my antenna went up for Amsterdam and living in the Netherlands. And I had never lived there. I had visited very, very briefly, and I just had a feeling that I would enjoy living in Amsterdam. And then that ended up being the catalyst that inspired me to apply to my master's at the University of Amsterdam. So once I knew that I wanted to start this organization and I had this idea that this could positively impact young people, I applied to the University of Amsterdam to study sociology and back up this claim that there is some connection between identity and family history knowledge, especially for young people of color who otherwise don't have access to their family histories. I had this question, so I thought, let me prove this with some research and also use this as an excuse to leave the country. So it was like, the perfect combination of reasons to pack up my bags and apply for a student visa. And it was a really, I should say, relatively easy entry coming into Europe as a student. And Amsterdam felt like the right fit because one, they're, slightly from my perspective as an American, they were more progressive, and there might be opportunities to dig into inquiries about Black identity in really unique ways, working with the Black community living in the Netherlands that has so many similarities to the American experience in terms of disconnects from identity because of histories of enslavement, colonialism, migrations. There's so many similar, although very different and distinct histories that I was just really interested to see what the connections might have been. And so I was like, let me do my research there. And it was just a perfect blend. And I ended up loving it there. And I stayed in Amsterdam for about 8 years. And then I spent a chunk of that time for a year living in Suriname, which has close ties to the Netherlands as a former colony and now like an incredible place with like such a rich history. And they also have very close ties to their family histories and their family stories. So a lot of my ancestors' work jumped off in Suriname. So there's just been this like wonderful surge of energy since I've moved to the Netherlands, and that's now taken me to the UK. It's all been connected, my journey. It's taken me to so many different places, and it doesn't seem like there should be a connection, but for some reason the synergy has worked.
Such a rich experience. How has been for you to work in such different countries, environment, cultures as a Black woman in terms of diversity, inclusion, racism? How was it that for you?
Now, it's a very different experience in every place, obviously. And in the United States, there is this acceptance that, when you're working in certain sectors, that as a Black woman, you're going to be one of very few, right? There's just like, we just don't expect to see much representation But as a result, when we do see each other and when we are given opportunities to support each other's work and to come together, there's a really strong sense of a community among, I would say, Black women or Black people just in the nonprofit sector. And I definitely felt that even just within my workplace, more so in New York, of the Black women supporting each other and, being a family within a family kind of situation. So that has always helped. But the reason why you need that community support is because it's hard. It's really difficult to work in this predominantly white environment, especially when I was in situations where, you're managing partnerships, relationships, fundraising relationships, especially where there's so much at stake and you're very seldom in the position of power. Like you're often asking, as I was mentioning earlier, your bosses or the people who are controlling the money are usually white men that have very few connections to the communities that we're serving. So it can be really frustrating when there's a disconnect between their interests and our interests. But fortunately or unfortunately for the organizations that I've worked with, I tend to be a really big mouth and I would raise trouble. And there were often meetings that were being called. And, one organization, they ended up forming a whole, separate diversity. I don't know, remember what we were calling it, but some committee for Black folks on staff but really what it came down to, we were advocating for each other, but really we were advocating for the communities that we're serving. Because if you're not hearing us, and our organization is meant to serve Black and brown people, children, and we're advocating for young people, then you need to sit down and listen. You need to, here's what we're saying very clearly. And if it's not being heard one time, two times, three times, then we need to really figure out what the solution is. So, yeah, with that community that I'm mentioning of Black people, especially Black women, that we would work together and we made noise until changes were made. And that really makes a difference when you stand up when you have people in your corner. It's much harder to do when you're the only. But when you have that sense of community, even if it's just two or three of you in an office environment like that, where you're outnumbered, but you have something very important to say, then it is worth rallying to make that message heard. Now, since I've left the United States, it's different because I've been more on my own. I went back to school, and then since then, it's just been about Ancestors Unknown and me doing side hustles and not working necessarily for anyone. I've been a freelancer. I've been really just working on my own terms. So I will say that's a challenge in any situation. It's absolutely a challenge doing that in a country that's not your home country. So I've had to make a number of adjustments and, have a sense of awareness of where I fit into this bigger picture. I acknowledge that there is a large number of challenges that come with being a Black person as a business owner, especially since I'm starting a business that in my mission statement, I'm very open and upfront that I care about Black and brown children. Obviously, Ancestors Unknown is serving young people in all schools with all types of communities. But when it comes to our primary purpose, it's to meet the needs of Black and brown children and make sure that their stories aren't left out. Now, that is not something that you just show up in a Dutch school and be like, hey, I'm trying to start a revolution and I'm talking about Black people's stories and I want to bring the ancestors into classrooms. I haven't created an easy path for myself. But with that challenge, I can also acknowledge that there comes a certain amount of privilege as an American, and speaking English and having an American accent and a blue passport. I think that my path to starting a business in the Netherlands, and even, with my very difficult hustle and trying to make things work, journey that's taken me from there to the UK. I don't want to say it's been easy at all. It's definitely been challenging, but as an American, there's definitely a lot more opportunity that I have that I wouldn't have otherwise. So I acknowledge those challenges, but I think it's important to point out that there's a number of privileges that I've been able to take advantage of while I'm making these moves and while I'm, starting these businesses and getting my visas. As hard as it's been, I just want to be transparent that I know that if I came from the global South, people probably wouldn't have given me the couple of grants that I've gotten to be able to settle here and to, be able to do what I've been able to do in the Netherlands. So I don't want to take us off on a tangent. I just want to be clear about those two things.
And I appreciate your transparency. And it's also good to know when we have some points in our favor
Yeah.
and to be able to use them. So I think it's actually really good. But also, you mentioned that you had to make some adjustments. A Black woman being in a different environment. What sort of adjustments have you done?
Living in the Netherlands, the experience with race and racism is very different from American sensibilities related to race and racism. So the immediate shock to the system is conversations related to race are much more muted and even like silenced that, as an American, as a Black American, and as I'm mentioning, I've worked in these settings where race is very much relevant and it's very present in our everyday lives and our conversations, and it's incorporated into everything. And if it isn't, if it's missing from a conversation, we need to address that. Like, how is systemic racism affecting our everyday work and our outcomes and so on? But when you go into the Netherlands, I want to be clear, white Dutch people are very quick to say, oh, race isn't a thing here, and we don't see color, and they're very like, they have this attempt to be colorblind. I don't know if they would refer to it in such a way, but there's just this ignorance about race and racism, although their society is very deeply racist. So that can be super frustrating to not be able or not see the clear efforts to address what is a very blatant racism, and then the silencing of the Black community's calls for addressing these issues. And it's throughout everything, when dealing with education, obviously that's where my work was related, but dealing with the police, and there's very different treatment for Black people, and it's so prevalent in Dutch society. And then there's the traditions of Sinterklaas, and they have this blackface tradition there that's just blatantly in your face once a year, but it's everywhere once a year. And when I was moving, when I moved there, that was like the very like peak of the calls to ban this tradition called Zwarte Piet, and people were really becoming outspoken. And there was like a big movement of that happening. But where I'm going with this is the coming in as a Black American, I've had to adjust to how these conversations are happening and where my voice might potentially fit or where there's room for changes to be made. It's not like you can come in from the outside and be like, oh, this is what needs to be changed in society. So you really do have to just pay attention and listen. So I think that was the biggest adjustment to make, is fitting in and finding out where the community is, the Black community, and what people are saying, and paying attention and not being stuck in the typical Black American response to things, and really seeing things through a different lens. I'm not sure if that made sense.
It does, because it's a very close reality. The answer is always the same. There's no racism in here. The situation here is completely different. It's not as bad as it is in other countries. So it's a way to shut the conversation down and to not allow us to address something that affects every single aspect of our lives.
Right.
But by not acknowledging, you're not allowing progress to be done. You're not allowing discomfort to come to you.
Right.
So yeah, denial. It's the
Right.
behavior.
Exactly. And then as an American, what I was often met with was, you're seeing this as an American. You don't understand this because you're American. We do this differently here. We do things differently here. Or get out of here with your race card. You're so American with how you see things. But it is important, because that can be kind of incredibly frustrating. That's very frustrating. But it is important to plug into what Black folks are saying locally, because that's where you're going to hear the true story, and that's where the frustrations lie, in the silencing of their voices, right? So yeah, maybe I am seeing things through an American lens, but I think once you're paying attention to what Black folks are saying in Portugal, what Black folks are saying in the Netherlands and in the UK, that is where we need to be focusing our attention.
Yeah, that's the thing. We come from distinct places, but when it comes to racism, the experience is very similar to all of us. That's what I'm actually realizing. Also, the struggles, because making the system acknowledge that problem is such a big thing to do. People don't like to talk about racism. If you are in a social gathering and you feel that you are very comfortable, it's a safe space, and you can talk about everything, try to introduce the topic of racism. Everyone will get hostile and everyone will try to point you out and say that, no, you are the problem because you are bringing this topic here. You are the one that are just like seeing things where they're not. Here it's the same, and I believe also that in some spaces that you navigated in the US as well. So I think it's really the common experience that we as a Black community can share. That's why I believe that your work, it's so beautiful because it's really coming from the roots.
Hmm.
Young people grow up with their self-esteem so low because they
Absolutely.
don't see the real story, and you are bringing this to them. As you work towards inclusivity and
Exactly.
integration, how, in your perspective, can we make workplaces more inclusive and more diverse?
Yeah, like I think the trick with workplaces is that a lot comes from the top down. And I can say this now, like working just for myself, so many decisions that I have to make. And then I realize, but as I'm thinking about hiring people and growing my team, I have to think, okay, how are these values of mine that I'm setting in place for Ancestors Unknown, how are they going to trickle down to everyone else in the organization? And in my long term vision, I have a large international organization. How is everybody going to share these same values that I have? So there has to be some way to communicate from that top or from the origins, the seed mission of a business or an organization. There has to be a way, not just for things to trickle down and to be communicated to everybody on a team, but there has to be a way for everybody to be incorporated into it or involved in that process in some way. Because how I see it is like, as I'm with Ancestors Unknown just by myself, it is going to reflect my personality and what I care about. But that could be missing a lot. There are a lot of voices that I can't represent as one person, and I'm not necessarily going to even achieve as great of success unless I'm bringing in a broader perspective, a range of ideas. And that's where I really feel like grow so much if we could diversify what is being put into the business. You know what I mean? So it needs to be more than just my vision trickling down to the growing team. So I'm thinking like, I have to ask them what they're contributing, and maybe that informs something new to change even something about Ancestors Unknown. And that needs to constantly be able to evolve. So I think with businesses that are already much bigger than Ancestors Unknown, which is easy to be, right? If you're more than one person, you're already a bigger business. But if you have more people involved already, the trick is just incorporating their voices and making sure people are heard. Maybe a mission can't be changed, but projects and the way we approach our work, we could incorporate different ways of working, ways of communicating, as long as more people's opinions and goals and all of these great things that go into building a business. But yeah, the values of the business are representing the team. And obviously people can focus on hiring diverse teams, and that's all well and good, but if there isn't an effort to bring people in and incorporate their smarts and their experiences and their perspectives, they're not going to want to stay. So it doesn't matter how much effort you put into hiring and checking off boxes. When you bring in a team, you have to make sure people are nourished when they're there, and then they'll want to contribute.
It's great to see this perspective of yours in what ways we can actually benefit from listening and including diverse opinions into the decision making process. So it's very good to hear that from you, a business owner that is planning to expand the business and to see how much you value diversity.
Exactly.
I hope we could have more business owners like you in the big organizations because that's how we make the difference. So I'm really glad with that. Thank you.
Oh yeah, of course. It's hard though. I mean, I know with a lot of people who are running big businesses, it's so money focused and income driven, and people sometimes lose sight of these social aspects of our work. And yeah, so some balance has to always be struck.
Of course, especially because we want to feel comfortable and safe at our workplace. this is what drives us to go there the next day and to perform in our best. So details, I think, are things that make the real difference in the workplace. So really glad that you brought that up. And before letting you go, I would like to ask you, with the experience that you have, what do you feel that are the truths that you weren't informed about the workplace?
Like when I was growing up, or
Yes.
truths that I wasn't informed about the workplace. Well, I thought that once you got a degree and once you did all of the work, this is actually what I was always taught. You pay your dues now so that you won't have to suffer later, or something along those lines. So it's for that reason that I went and got my bachelor's degree, and I got my law degree, and then later did my master's. I think at that point I already knew it was all, I knew it was all a game. But the idea that you get your degree, you get your education, and then work should be easy. Like there's should be a red carpet rolled out for you because you're so smart and so well educated. But no, work isn't like that. It's more about experience, and you're going to have to learn as you go. So I think I didn't anticipate, you know, it wasn't just about getting in the door of these jobs or even a career. It really is every single day a matter of learning something new, and keep having to make a new and a very serious effort to get better. Because, yeah, there's no red carpet. I'm still looking for it. I'm like, where, maybe at any point now when they say that the work, you did all the hard work, now it gets easy. I'm like, any day now. But as it is up until now, it's hard work at every step of the way.
Again, I'm very happy that you mentioned that. And I can also review myself in that previous belief, because I also grew up believing that once I got my degree, that everything would be easier. Because what I've seen around me were people that had their degree and seemed to be happy. It seems that they didn't have problems at the workplace. So I saw them and I was just like, if it works like this for them, it will work for me. But what I've realized is that talking about the struggles of the workplace was a taboo. Nobody talked about it, especially when I was growing up. Right now, I don't know, but when I was a teenager, no one would talk about it.
Hmm.
Everyone would make it seem easy.
Hmm.
And once I arrived there, just like you, I've realized that it's a work in progress.
Yeah,
It doesn't stop at college.
right.
No. So
I think that it's a beauty of Black parents, but it's a blessing and a curse in a way, because they're so good at hiding struggle from us. I can say from my personal experience, and also, I've heard many of us say that, our parents, we didn't have much growing up, but you didn't really know the intensity of their struggle or what daily grind looked like, because they shielded it. I felt shielded from it. I had a great Christmas, and I had everything that I needed for school, and I was going to activities. So I didn't know that my mom was, barely, scraping by. How would you know? Right. So that's such a common experience. But as a result, we don't know, how hard work life was, and how hard it was to balance having a family and taking care of your children and surviving at work in a stressful setting. And, since we're shielded from so much, maybe I should speak for myself. Maybe I expected adulthood, just generally adulthood, to be a lot easier, because nobody told me it was like this.
I feel the same, believe me. But yeah, I hope that at least next generations will be more aware the reality and what adulthood is in practice. Because in theory, it's very beautiful, and we are all happy, and we all can make it very simple. But in practice, it's not like this. No, no. So thank you.
Exactly. No need. We're like, no need to hide the truth. At this point, I think everybody's weaknesses are out on the table. So let's keep it that way.
I hope we do. Dana, thank you so much for this inspiring and transparent conversation. I'm pretty sure that after this, our listeners will be very curious about yourself. They will want to know more about Ancestors Unknown. And here comes the question: how and where can they find you?
Oh, so First of all, thank you. And I'm happy that anyone might want to find me to learn more. I hope that's true. So I would first start with Ancestors Unknown website, and that is ancestors-unknown.org. But I'm also on Instagram, Ancestors Unknown, and me personally as Black Girl Gone. So Black Girl Gone on Instagram and Ancestors Unknown. Those are my main hotspots.
Thank you so much. And please keep doing this amazing job because we need it. It's very important. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sofia. I appreciate you. And you keep this up too. I'm super excited about your podcast. Can't wait to listen to all the episodes.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Color at Work. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe, rate it, and leave a review. Until next time.